Good afternoon, and welcome to AskTheHealthSystemCIO.com All-Stars, the State of ACOs, a complimentary webinar from HealthSystemCIO.com, sponsored by Encore, a Quintiles company. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of HealthSystemCIO.com, and I will be your moderator today. We're looking to have a free-flowing discussion with our panelists. I encourage you to go ahead and send your questions in as they occur to you in the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and leave the default set to all panelists. We may go ahead and take those as they come in, so go ahead and send them in as they occur to you. You can download the deck. You see the URL in front of you. I sent it out in the chat box, and I can also send it out again if anybody needs it. And there's a shortened URL at the bottom of all the slides, so you can look at some of the background material we've put together for our discussion. We are recording today's event, and it will be posted to our YouTube channel within 2 business days, if not sooner. You'll receive an email when it is ready. Just so you can see how we're going to spend our time today, we're going to go probably about 45 minutes. First, we're going to have our ACO panel discussion with our panel, who I'll introduce momentarily. Then we're going to hear from our sponsor, represented by Randy Thomas, Managing Director of Value Realization Solutions with Encore, and we will have our Q&A. So to introduce our panel, first we have our good friend Chuck Christian, VP of Technology and Engagement with the Indiana Health Information Exchange, Liz Johnson, CIO of Acute Care Hospitals and Applied Clinical Informatics with Tenet Healthcare, and Rick Schooler, VP and CIO at Orlando Health. And there's their sort of bios from their LinkedIn pages, which we can put up from time to time when they are speaking. So to lay the groundwork for our event today, I'm going to go through a few slides, have some background information. It is a changing world, and I think the most telling thing from this slide are the statistics, the objectives. Announced earlier this year, 30% of traditional Medicare payments through alternative payment models by the end of next year, which is a significant number, and 50% by the end of 2018, which is, depending on your perspective, a frighteningly large number and your position at the moment. Well, I found, in my research, I found an excellent resource. It's probably not overly advanced, but it's a very good primer for people looking at ACOs and for those looking to educate their coworkers about ACOs. It's a short paper, but it was very helpful to me, and it may be helpful to some of those on the call today. It's from Letty. It's their ACO issue brief, and then it describes some basic structures and operations of an ACO, breaks it down into different sections. Like I said, it's not a long paper, it's not exhaustive, but I found it to be an excellent primer. A few definitions, which I don't have to read for you here, but we go over the definition of exactly what an ACO is and what people are trying to achieve when they form them. And obviously, in order to be effective as an ACO, you need to practice population health management, and probably the phrase that's most telling there is extremely resource intensive, and I'm sure our guests would agree with that this is not easy work, this is not minor work, this is very serious, entire transformative work, enterprise transforming work, has to come from the top down, has to be funded, so everyone's got to be all in, that type of thing. The recent article came out from JAMA showing the Pioneer ACOs reduced low-value services by 1.9% in the first year. So again, focus on low-value services and a modest reductions is what we're seeing. So, you know, we can discuss that a little bit. That's interesting. Another point that was made in an article I found was that it's easier for those that have a lot of weight to cut to lose weight than someone that's running lean. So again, about finding modest reductions. If you're in good shape, it's a little more difficult to find those major savings. You may have already done so. So again, you can read through this slide at your own discretion and when you have time. We have options under the Medicare program. There's track one, and this is something that we'll get into as we discuss things further. this is a very important issue about which track you're going to be on, how much risk you're willing to take on. Track 1 is the most common, and it's got, essentially, I believe, no downside, and that's why it's attractive, but no downside means extremely limited upside. They don't have to assume downside risk. Tracks 2 and 3, a little more aggressive, but you're on the hook for a little more. So again, this is another major issue that we'll talk about. And again, this is the whole point of this discussion is to help you, no matter where you are on the ACO journey, have some thoughts about things to consider, what you might want to do, and what's worked for other folks. Again, no risk, no reward. Most doctors happy to accept bonuses but don't want to be on the hook. Only 7% of ACOs opted for the high-risk, high-reward deal. Interesting to talk to those folks. Here is just a basic graph or a chart showing you some of the features of moving to accountable care. I'll leave that for you to look at. And then, of course, a big part of our discussion will be the IT of ACOs. ACOs, the lifeblood of an ACO is going to be IT, and we're going to talk about interoperability and all those kind of things. There's certain tools you need, but then beyond the tools, there's interoperability that you need, and whether or not that's a reality at this point, that's, again, for our discussion, is interoperability where it needs to be for ACOs to function as they're intended to function. So I think that'll be an interesting point of our discussion. And this was a point in the Weddy brief, regardless, and obviously Chuck Christian, one of our panelists with the Indiana Health Information Exchange, can talk about this more, but regardless of the Weddy brief, regardless of the participation with HA, most ACOs are not currently able to seamlessly push in full complete patient health data. So again, are the tools out there, is the interoperability out there to get where we want to go? So let's start bringing in our panel, and let's start with the questions. I thought a logical place to start would be getting into the game. And I want to just, let's start with first the things that I've gone over. I'd like to ask our panelists one at a time if they want to sort of go further with any of the points I brought up, what you find the most intriguing, the most challenging, or the issues that I've discussed that are most top of mind for you right now. So let's start with Liz Johnson. Liz, what are your thoughts around everything, the points that I brought up that you find the most sort of intriguing or problematic?
Thanks, Anthony. Of course. I think you've really hit on a great deal of the points that we're all dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Interoperability is not mature. As we all know, data that's moving from one EMR to another is not necessarily standardized, although we have a CCDA that doesn't even begin to cover what we need to really risk manage large populations. There is diversity in what the payers, because while we've talked a great deal about Medicare, many of us are doing far more deals with the private payers, and each one of them has a different set of needs and desires in terms of the way they want to manage it.
Oh, I think we lost Liz's phone connection. So, Liz, if you get a chance, go ahead and dial back in. Rick, you wanna just jump on that question and let me know your thoughts?
Sure. I noticed one phrase you had in one of the slides that was getting at risk stratification. And regardless of how soon people get into this way of delivering health care and this level of accountability, the notion of being a clinically integrated enterprise with all the different providers that are involved and the ability to stratify risk and engage patients. I think those, I personally believe, based on the things that I know about this and the things we've done here in Orlando, that there is no accountable care unless you're clinically integrated. If you don't have the alignment that you need with not only your employee, but your aligned providers that are essentially going into this with you as a health system or even as a health plan, if you're not both, legally aligned, and if you're not aligned with regard to an information flow standpoint, and if you're not able to stratify patients, meaning you understand the patients that need the most attention, above and beyond, what you give everyone. I believe that, along with ensuring that patient engagement occurs in ways that it has not historically, because let's face it, before we got into this scenario called accountable care, one of the keys to a successful patient outcome has always been patient engagement. With or without the technologies, whichever technology you want to cite, putting all that aside, it's always been vital for the patient to be fully engaged in his or her own care and his or her own care plan. And so that's that's a deeper issue, quite frankly, in my opinion, than technology. However, the way things are shaking up with reimbursement, it's going to align those incentives a little differently as more and more is shifted back to the individual patient, as well as the risk now is being borne by will begin to be borne by the providers and the health plan. So I think those are three things I would just highlight: the need for clinical integration, the need for patient engagement, and the ability to promptly and effectively and accurately stratify populations.
Excellent, Rick. Liz, thanks for jumping back on. Sorry we lost you there. Did you want to continue your thought, or you can feel free to start from the beginning?
No, I'm fine. Anthony, I'm not sure where I got caught off. We'll let Chuck do his piece and keep going.
Okay, Chuck, what are your thoughts on what Rick said, or the overall points that I made, and what you think is most important?
Well, I mean, I think that both Liz and Rick both made great points, and and I was just at a meeting up in Detroit last week, actually yesterday, last week. Sometimes it seems like a week. And there was a lot of discussion about ACOs. I actually moderated a panel discussion with some great CIOs that were, and this topic came up around it. And one of the things, and I'm going to kind of speak to it from an interoperability standpoint, is that, everybody needs access to the information. Our model of the way that we do interoperability in Indiana is a little bit differently than others. We're gathering data from about 109 or 116 facilities in Indiana, so we have a great aggregation of information that has been normalized. And so one of the things that we're looking at is, particularly for those folks that have ACOs, where else is the patient having services? Because unless you're requiring your patients to only have services at your facilities, which we're not. It's not an HMO model. They need to know where else that patient is receiving care and what care they're having and what the outcomes are. And so where I would agree that moving data around from one EMR to the other is one form of interoperability, but and it may be I have a biased view. Some will say I do. Being a customer of the exchange and now working for it, is that having access to the information is extremely valuable, regardless of wherever that patient had care. So I'll give you a couple examples of what we're doing. Is for our ACOs in Indiana, we've put together a use case for access to the information for their defined populations. And so if that patient accesses care, regardless of where they go to care, whether it's the ACO facility or someone else's, then they have access to their records to look and see what services that patient had then. And so their case managers or care managers, if you will, can look at that information and then contact the patient and guide them appropriately to what are the additional services they may need. And so I'm not sure it's actually, when we use this term of interoperability, of moving the data around, how many copies of that information does there really need to exist? I think, access to the information is really what the case managers want, and they don't really, I shouldn't say they don't really care. They need easy access to it that's appropriate, and so they can actually use that data in how they take care of those patients and manage those patients' care.
Yeah, Anthony, this is Liz. I would add on to what I agree with Chuck, and duplicating data all over the place is certainly not the goal. I do think that as a CIO, it's going to be critical for us to have the data available that we can actually follow cases through. And I think the repositories of that, our ability to really look for gaps in care and get that to our navigators or the care management persons, however they may be phrased in your particular organization, is critical. And then really reporting against that in terms of the quality measures, because one of the things that certainly for the for Medicare, all 33 quality measures are going to be required. And as we negotiate with individual payers, they are very interested in us as we move toward a more pay-for-quality model, that we are collecting that data, that it is normalized, and we're able to show how outcomes were impacted by getting care to the patient. And I think Rick and Chuck would agree with me, you know, we want to get care with our patients done sooner than later. Obviously, for years we've known that if we could be preventive in our approach rather than reactive, care would improve. And that certainly is one of the goals of this whole set of models to move care forward.
Rick, talk a little bit about the idea of getting your toe into this pool, and you know, and tell me if I'm thinking about this logically. You need to get out there and start taking on. Well, first you have to get to the level where you think you can take on some at-risk arrangements, where you can be responsible for a patient for a certain dollar amount, and then you can manage that patient. And then you need to sort of make some arrangements with some payers and sort of either based on a certain amount of lives or based on certain conditions, some type of pool, and then try and manage that pool and see how you do. I mean, an ACO is sort of at the end of that spectrum, is it not? Tell me your thoughts about it. How does that work?
Well, you know, getting into this particular, aspect of healthcare delivery and reimbursement and so forth, I think an organization must first determine, do we have the appropriate skill sets, both at the executive level and at the care delivery level to do this? Because this is a different mindset than most particularly on the healthcare provider side, most of us have been, schooled in over the last, many years. So there is an issue of, getting to your point about how do you assess if you're ready to go at risk, or even just if you're ready to go after shared savings, because, you're going to fail either way if you don't have the right kind of leadership, the right kind of people involved that have actually had experience, and quite typically a lot of this is health plan type experience. But also, if you don't have, as I mentioned earlier about this notion of getting some clinical integration, if you don't have a network that you can put on the table to say, okay, I am in control, of this much of the healthcare continuum, and I'm willing to go, at risk, or I'm willing to get into this, given, for my piece of this. If you take full accountability, like in a full capitation scenario, which a lot of people think someday we'll be dealing with in most markets, you better have, not only the expertise, but you've got to have all the bases covered with geography and with all the different kinds of healthcare provided. So how do you know if you're ready to join an ACO? Well, I mean, if you're just going in for upside, you can get in and not, in my opinion, you can maybe not be ready, and you can learn what it's going to take to be ready. And because when the needle moves over to the risk side, I can tell you here it's different, because in our market here, a lot of our docs that are lining up with us and that are joining our clinically integrated network company, they're not interested at all, at least for the next year or two, in entertaining any risk. They want to see their baseline, and they want to see how it's all working and how it's performing and where the gaps are before they actually jump in and take the risk.
Right.
But I don't know if, can you wait too long and then not have somebody to partner with? Well, it depends on your market probably, but most clinically integrated networks, if you're a viable provider, let's say I'm a physician practice, if I've got a great reputation and I've got good metrics, most ACOs or CINs are going to welcome you in, but particularly if there's not they don't have an excessive number of providers in a given geography. But I just think that it's kind of a thing where you may not know for sure if you're actually ready. Do I have some of the key IT platforms? Do I have risk management? Do I have a pop health platform? Do I have the ability to exchange information? Do I have alignment with the business and with IT? Do I have executive buy-in? Do I have people that understand, you know, managing the health status of an individual as well as the population? I think those are all check boxes that you got to get through. But in the end, I mean, like when we started 2 years ago, we just said, hey, we think we've got the basics, so let's go out and just see how well we do, because there just seemed to be no time better than the other just to get in. But we're not taking risk yet. We're not taking risk yet, though.
Right. Yeah, I would say, Rick, that's an excellent description, and I would encourage people. Very similar story here. Like I said, we've got 17 ACOs across the entire country, and you know, close to 700,000 lives, but we didn't do that in a week. And we're gathering data and evaluating where risk would be appropriate, and I think you're absolutely right. That goes back to the aggregation of data and the ability to do the analytics so that you can really understand where risk might be appropriate and encourage care to continue to improve. And I think also, and I would certainly ask the other two gentlemen, it's also getting the confidence of the physician so they understand how it all works. This is, you know, many of our physicians today that practice did not go to business school, they went to medical school. And so they want to understand how this works. They understand what care plans are and what paths of care are. They also are facing, just as the hospitals are facing, delivering care in different venues that are away from what has really been our mainstay, which is brick and mortars of large facilities. And so the shift that Rick and Chuck are both talking about is also impacting large providers that are now looking at that almost dichotomy of, do you deliver care in the acute care setting, not maybe the best you know, environment for the care that needs to be rendered, so you're moving those persons into lower settings of care appropriately, but it's changed the economic model. So I think Rick's comment about being very clear and aligned with your CEO and CFO, you know, making sure that they're getting exposed to the kind of education that they need to understand how this full model works, and we're certainly doing that.
Chuck, you want to touch on anything Liz said, and also as a secondary question for you, talk about the role that HIEs like yours can have in helping ACOs fill out those gaps in care to know what's going on with these people they may be at risk for.
Well, you know, depending upon the HIE, because, you know, there are a lot of do it differently. Some of them are just, you know, moving data from one place to the next, message delivery and that kind of stuff. Others are building, you know, clinical data repositories, and that's, you know, that's kind of what we've done over the course of 30-something years since we started loading data into it. But it's not one great big data repository. It's a what I call a centralized federated model, that where the data is normalized. But I think the value that an HIE brings to the ACOs is, you know, giving them some additional tools of being able to, you know, ferret out and figure out where those patients are having care. One of the things that we're doing, and other HIEs are doing as well, is providing that ADT alerting service to the payers or to the ACOs, and so that as soon as that patient is registered, and you know, most of them don't want real time. They don't want instantaneous information. They want a listing of all the patients that had services and where they had services yesterday, so the case managers can work those today. And I think that one of the things they can do is be that aggregator of information, so they can, the case managers have one place to go rather than having to call the facility where the patient was seen, talk to the folks in medical records, get a release of information, and get that, you know, it's just too laborious to do it that way. They need, you know, better, quicker access to the information that's appropriate. And I'm not suggesting that, you know, we throw open the gates to the data warehouse and let anybody and everybody, you know, review it. It needs to be appropriate. It needs to be an approved use case, and the organizations need to understand what access that they're asking, you know, to give to these folks to, you know, treat their patients. So I think that's, from a health information exchange standpoint, it's not about moving the data around, but once again providing access to that information, but also bundling some services in on top of that to partner with the ACOs to kind of be their data. I guess, I don't know, traffic cops are really a bad term, is the only one that can come to mind, is be their data partner so they can provide that alerting or additional information that they may need in a very, very timely manner.
Good point, good point. I want to talk about something that Rick said earlier, which is the idea that, and it's so true, this has got to be CEO board led. We are changing, we are going to become a different type of organization. Okay, then we start putting the tools in place and we start transforming the organization, all these type of things. But there has to be a real commitment to this. Liz, why don't you touch on that first?
Sure. I think what the commitment may not be in the beginning so much to ACO specific, but more to the general concepts of the shift in the healthcare market to a value-based payment system. And when you think about a strategic position for any organization, we're all clearly cognizant that's what's coming. And so then as you begin to sort of have those strategic discussions and really define what does that mean for your organization, where do you deliver care today, how do you measure value, is your aggregate data clean and reliable? As Chuck said, is it available at the right time? And then as you begin to do that, because one could believe that ACOs may or may not be the permanent long-term solution, but value-based care is going to be the long-term solution. So that's, when I think about getting the most chief executives in whatever your organization may be on board, you start with having them acknowledge and buy into the concepts, and then really begin to talk about what data do you need and how do you measure it. Again, very frequently our CEOs and boards don't operate at, certainly don't operate at the data element level, but they understand, and Chuck used it earlier, case studies, and how would this translate out into a population? How would this translate out into where we deliver care? And then you go from there. That's the way that we've approached it.
Rick, give me an idea of how CIOs should be handling this. Now, it's a difficult question because it totally depends on the environment of your organization. It depends on your CEO. It depends on your CEO's vision, desire, how quickly they want to move down this. But as you mentioned, you need to walk together. The CEO needs to find out or know where the organization is from an IT point of view. Do we have any of this stuff in place? So some CEO may say, oh, I'm all in. But the CIO say, well, we're not there yet. Or you could have a CEO saying, well, I'm very skeptical of all this. And you sort of have to take the lead. But just as a high level, what do you see the CIO's role in the boardroom and in the CEO, CFO, COO meetings? What should the CIO's role be?
Well, let's put it this way. The CIO had better get the right people's attention about the basics that are required to move into this space. Now, we kind of have talked about some sort of population health platform. That's going to be more for the, the care coordination, managing, the patient through the continuum. That's going to have alerts. That's going to have a lot of analytics. It's going to have a lot of stuff that's going to be used in the real-time, day-to-day management of patients. You're going to have to be sure you've got some way of either, stratifying risk, understanding where, who the patients that are driving up the cost, and based on historical, what are their probabilities of needing advanced levels of care and so forth, return visits to the ED and so forth. You've got to have that kind of capability as well. You've got to have the ability to exchange information. You've got to have some sort of probably a high-powered analytics capability, whether it's inside some of these platforms or not. Patient portals, ways of engaging patients, patient monitoring. So these are all technologies that, and there are others, that the CIO has got to ensure that the decision makers and the leaders of the organization that are not only overall, but also those that are going to manage and run this. Probably most effective to get with the people who will have operational accountability for a lot of the aspects of the journey into, value-based care or accountable care, whatever, pick your reimbursement model. But, as we move away from fee-for-service, I think it's important to make those connections and let the executive team, hopefully if you're the CIO, you're considered part of the executive team and you're in the council or the cabinet or whatever your organization calls it. But if you're not, you've got to get the attention of the right people to ensure that the investments are made, because in my experience, if you get down to the sort of end of the trail and the technology is not where it needs to be, people will take it upon themselves to go fix it outside of your realm, and or you as the CIO will get blamed for it. So do yourself a favor, for the CIOs on the call, and get connected at the operational level as well as the executive level, ensuring that those people hear you, because they may not want to hear you at first, because the last thing they want to think about is having to spend more money on IT to be able to do something, because, we've made all those investments in all those EHRs and all those other systems. This is just a different way of delivering care. Well, it's enabled by IT. You got to be sure they understand that, and I would attack it from both sides.
Yeah, this is Chuck. I'd absolutely agree with what Rick is saying, is that you've got to get early on into the process and being involved in the conversations, particularly if there's consulting groups that are being brought in to help educate the organizations about what they need to be doing with ACOs, because most organizations just don't have that expertise on the bench already, so they're bringing folks in. So, yeah, you need to be there at the table as a CIO to be viewed as that business partner through this process. I think it's absolutely imperative.
I think it's also critical.
Go ahead, Liz. Go ahead, Liz.
I think it's also critical that you know what you already have and what you need, and that you don't overpromise. If we think about, Rick hit it directly on the head, and Chuck added to it, we did just spend a lot of money putting EMRs across this country, and often we get questioned on why aren't we already ready for this, what weren't we planning, and the answer is certainly that depending on where you were at the beginning of that journey as to where you are now, and certainly you have more data than you've ever had before, which is a great set of progress. However, it is easy to fall in the trap of hearing the maybe enthusiasm or maybe lack of enthusiasm, either way, and thinking you already have. You need to be clear, what can you do today, what could you do in the immediate future, what could you do in the long-term future, so the expectations are aligned, particularly as you begin to look at risk. So that, it's one thing to take the upside, but it's a whole different thing if you're not really ready to do the analytics you need and provide the data, as Chuck has talked about several times, to the persons that are going to manage those lives, then you're not, serving well in your capacity as a CIO.
I think it would also be good as CIOs for us to get in with the operational leaders and start asking questions, because I'll wager that a lot of CIOs are actually more up to speed in terms of the overall picture of what's required, both in terms of function as well as technology. And if you're doing your job as a CIO, first and foremost, you know the business. So you've got to take it upon yourself to understand exactly what are the things that have to go on from a business patient care functional standpoint, and then relate that with the leaders and the operational folks, relate that to solutions that are either already in-house, as Liz points out, or that we need to invest in, additionally.
Let's talk about risk. Rick, you said you're not taking on risk right now. Liz, I'm not sure if you said you were or not. Chuck, you had the CIO hat very recently with the health system, so let's all touch on it. Liz, you want to go first?
Sure. I think we're all probably in the very same place, and that is we're examining opportunities where risk is obviously there's an upside to it, and rather than get into the specifics, I think we're looking at it carefully. And again, Rick really did a nice job at the beginning of talking about, remember, this is a partnership. You're not the only one taking on risk here, so you really need to get your clinicians on board and make sure you have the infrastructure. So we're early in looking at it.
Chuck, you want to talk about risk at all? Your thoughts around, you know, when an entity might be ready to take on a little risk? If you don't take on risk, you're not going to have much of an upside, and I don't know how much incentive is there to really change culture and change practice.
Well, I mean, I think everybody, you know, is particularly those that were running Pioneer ACOs, you know, they're taking on risk, but it may be very, very minimal. But the thing about it is I don't think that, you know, ACOs are not going to be the only methodology in which the organizations are going to be required to take risk, because if you listen to what CMS is saying, by the end of next year, 2016, their goal is to have a very high percentage, about 50% of all their payouts at some kind of risk-sharing proposition. And then by the end of 2016 or 2018, they want about 85% of all their payout at some level of risk-sharing. Now, that may be bundled payments, that may be an ACO model, or it may be some other quality measured type of approach. But at the end of the day, all the organizations that are particularly, you know, taking Medicare and Medicaid patients are going to be in some kind of risk-sharing model. So I think it's imperative that the organizations understand what those models are going to be and how the prospective payment system is going to change in order to include those risks. I mean, we've been doing risk things for years. If you remember some of the quality metrics and things that started several years ago, and a lot of the insurers, I know Blue Cross Blue Shield, when I was at the hospital in you know, southern Indiana, we were filling out a lot of quality sheets, and that will, you know, how we depended, you know, how we scored on that was depend upon what our contract would look like the next time. Well, for me, that's a form of risk, because if you're not performing at the top notch of the quality metrics, you're not going to get the best possible seat at the table for when you're doing the contract renewal. So we're all going to be involved in risk at some level or another. It just depends on how deep at the end of the pool you want to dive into it, you know, early on.
I agree with Chuck.
Go ahead.
I agree as well, because you know, there's this notion of default risk, which, you know, we're all incurring now. It's just to whatever degree, but it struck me that bundle payments may be, for a lot of organizations, that may be our first foray into really, you know, feeling the impact of risk, because, you know, we're going to have an integrated continuum with good coordination and good information flow to do well under bundle payments. So maybe that's really where it starts versus, you know, taking risk for a defined population. It may come through a defined set of clinical procedures, but nonetheless, that need for clinical integration is going to be, it's on us now. It's just probably going to intensify.
Agree.
All right, we'll take a break for a minute, and we're going to hear from our sponsor. Randy Thomas is going to be talking about electronic quality measures in a very compelling message here. So let's hear from Randy, and then we'll get back to our panel discussion. Randy, thanks for joining us. Thanks for sponsoring.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks, Liz and Chuck and Rick. I think really great insights on what it takes to be successful in this whole shift to fee for value. And one of the things, and I think this can sort of tie a lot together that you've heard so far in the discussion. We think of the enabling IT for population health. So whether it's ACOs, I think Liz made a great comment, the label is probably going to shift, but the reality of having to prove value for defined populations and be at risk for those populations is the world we're rapidly evolving into. And so thinking about the IT enabling capabilities you need, sort of the foundational capabilities, of course, this journey the whole country's been on to implement certified EHRs, as well as various infrastructure capabilities around interoperability and patient outreach, and then extending into the frontline care management, those identification of the folks in the population who need more hands-on, active engagement, so that they can be compliant with their health regimens, as well as the all-important analytics and measurement to understand who those populations are and to be able to have ongoing measurement of your progress. So that sort of framework, we think, is a helpful way to understand the kind of IT-enabling capabilities that you're going to need. At the core of all of this, at the core of value-based care, of the journey to fee-for-value, will be electronic clinical quality measures. The world is evolving from claims-based and abstracted measures, and we're evolving into this world of electronic measures, and these measures mean that the data to report them is captured in the course of care delivery. And just because you have a certified EHR in place does not necessarily mean that you will have all of the data accurate and consistent to be able to report these measures. There is no intervention in the reporting of clinical quality measures. So one of the things that you might want to do in your organization is do a quick check of those measures that line up between the electronic clinical quality definition and the inpatient quality reporting definition, which is a manually abstracted measures. There are two different ways of gathering these measures. This is real data showing organization that, for example, the third row from the bottom, that VTE measure, they're 100% reporting on the manually abstracted measure. They're 35.6% on the electronic measure. That's not a difference in clinical care, in clinical process. It's a data issue. And Rick made a comment that, behooving and pleading with his fellow CIOs to get on top of these kinds of data and analytic issues, because that improving that 35% back to the 100% that the abstracted measure was showing will mean looking at what the data issues are and looking at potential changes in workflow and configuration of the EHR. So I'll just leave you, or just coming up on that this issue of the underpinning of value-based care is measurement. Electronic measures are what all of measurement is evolving to, and everyone has a stake in that. And no more important a stake is the role that IT will play to ensure that the data needed to support measurement and analytics and care management is reliable and accurate and consistent. So I'll turn things back to you, Anthony.
Very good, Randy. Well, thank you so much for the presentation, and thanks very much to Encore for sponsoring this event. We truly appreciate it. I think we're going to push our time a little bit longer, just a few more minutes, and touch on some of the other important issues. Rick, hardest, most complicated aspect of this from an IT point of view?
Well, for us, it's been ensuring that we continue to fund the core infrastructure to run our organization, while at the same time targeting these differentiating technologies that, unless you've been in a health plan responsible for managing, population of patient health, you're going to have to get yourself in a position to fund these additional items. So again, the temptation is going to be to continue to fight, the fire of the day, or continue to cut back on costs. Your spending is too much of a percentage of total expense, or some other metric. But you will not be able to say that you're going to be there as an organization delivering this kind of care unless the IT is already there. Mm-hmm. So, in my opinion, it absolutely has to be built before they come.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking about the field of the dreams kind of analogy, right, Rick? I think having the data is the hardest part, and having it secure, complete, reliable, identified appropriately, all issues that we face every day, but certainly will play a role in our ability to be able to be effective in this arena.
No,
You focus on this every day.
Hang on a second. Let me do a yeah, but for just a second.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to agree. Yeah, I'm going to agree with Rick and Liz, but I'm also going to, I'm a process guy. And I think one of the things that we have a tendency to do in this industry is, we try to layer a layer of technology on top of bad processes and then expect the magic to work and everything to be smoothed out. But I think in reality we'll all agree that if we don't have good processes, then the only thing we're going to do is make it fail faster and on a more regular basis. And so I think that there's a process component of this that's going to be really hard, because we can have the best data in the world, we can have the best analytics in the world, but if we don't have the processes in place to incorporate that into our business processes, how is it going to, and understand how this is going to impact how we provide care, to who we provide care, where we provide care, and then use that information to inform the other business processes and incorporate that all the way back into our accounts payable and patient accounting systems. I think that's where we are today, is we're learning how to create those best practices that actually work and don't add to the risk pool that we're already taking with trying to do this.
I would say, Chuck, you're absolutely right. I think the combination of two is what's going to make us be capable of being successful.
Yep. Amen. Amen, yeah, sister.
Had to get it in there, didn't you?
I had to get it in there.
All right. We're kind of coming to the end of our time, so these are just some other things to think about. It'll be a whole nother discussion. Well, maybe let's just touch on this because this one's very interesting to me. Going at risk, taking responsibility for not the treatment but the wellness of individuals. And then we want to get data from the wearables. We want to send them messages to do certain things. We're incentivizing them to join gyms. We're going to be finding out if they go to the gym. We're going to be finding out how long they spent on the treadmill. We're going to be incentivizing them for good behaviors. We keep going, further and further. Eventually we hit the privacy wall where people say you're not entitled to that data. I'm just thinking things out, but you become a different type of organization. And I just want to get general thoughts around that. And does that hit a wall at some point? And do people have to take responsibility for themselves at some point? Rick, why don't you go first? Oh, go ahead, Liz.
I've got to run to another meeting, and but I want to just make one comment. When our devices started coming in our doors a few years ago, we kind of scratched our heads and went, what are we going to do? People are going to bring iPhones and Androids and so on and so forth to the workplace. We need to figure out how to deal with it because they become valuable tools. Yes, of course, there's an endpoint at which we have to allow opt-in and out of our wearables, but it's part of our future. So if we're not thinking today about how to take care of, and it's not just the millenniums, they often, as they call I'll at least pick on Chuck and I, the silver surfers, we are going to need the ability to be able to incorporate that data and use it effectively. And with that, I will say thank you to everyone, and I have to run to another meeting, but thank you, Anthony and Randy, Chuck, and Rick. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you, Liz. We appreciate it.
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, I'll agree with what Liz said. At some point in time, I think that I was reading a piece this morning. Actually, I was scanning it about how there's one research group, and I can't remember where it was from, it was Massachusetts or Wisconsin, were actually marrying up social media data with clinical data to see if there's any correlation between those two. And I think at some point in time that this generation is going to throw the privacy flag if they aren't already doing it now a little bit, and kind of throwing the boat anchor out, going, hey, because I think that they're just now starting to learn that there is a lot of data about me that's out there. I mean, I put stuff out on Facebook and Twitter and that kind of stuff, and then depending upon but I don't put every thought that I have on either one of those mediums. And so I think at some point in time, that, you know, I don't think that my phone needs to tell everybody where I am at every moment in time, and I do not believe that the stores need, as I walk past a counter, need to be able to give me the latest and greatest ad on my phone. So it's no different than on our healthcare. I think there is a place for the wearables to help with the management of chronic care, such as the folks that have diabetes and, you know, COPD and, you know, heart failure and those type of things. Those things that require a great deal of management. But as Liz said, you know, those of us who are silver surfers, and I really hadn't thought about that at that point in time, is that they don't understand the technology enough yet as far as, you know, how they can be used to help manage their care. They've got to have a little bit more, a different level of coaching. But I think that it's my generation and, you know, my parents' generation are going to, you know, push back more on the privacy piece than my children's generation will at this point in time. But I think that time's still coming.
Rick, how far do we go, Rick, with this into you know, health?
Well, you know, you think about how this is kind of shaping up. Right now we've got a contingent of society that I would call the worried well, okay? And these are the people that are paying a lot of attention to their health day to day. They always have. They're going to be wearing all the different monitoring devices and be using a lot of the data for their own satisfaction, their own edification, what have you. But now we're going to begin to see employers begin to introduce metrics that are going to start tying a little more into the wallet of the employees. You look at biometrics, you look at blood pressure, you look at lipids, you look at body mass index. They're going to start, and our organization is doing some of that. It's all on the upside now. If you participate, you get a credit on your health insurance. But at some point soon, just like we'll be taking on risk as providers, the people paying for the health care, the major contingent of it, are going to start pushing to get people to a better health status. And that's going to be probably the beginning, in my mind, of when some of this stuff that today is more consumer-oriented, it's kind of gadgetry, it's not something we really take serious in terms of healthcare delivery, but it will begin to enter, because as organizations like ours, and those on the phone, begin to take on that risk, we're going to start seeking ways to ensure that we keep those patients healthy. And I think we'll focus probably initially, and maybe on a major aspect of it, the focus will be on the very sick people, or those that we believe will be sick, as the initial focus, because that's where all the money's going. You know, we're not losing money on the worried well. The money goes to, you know, to the care of the very chronically ill, or the people that we know are going to be chronically ill that are in that stage. So I think this stuff will continue to grow in its importance. It will wane probably in terms of popularity, and it'll become more mainstream in terms of health maintenance, tied to what an individual pays for health care, what a provider goes at risk for, and then what the employer and the health plan actually pay for the care. So I think it's going definitely to an advanced stage. I'm not sure that all the gadgets we see today are actually going to survive as things that are truly meaningful to where healthcare is headed, but you know, it may remain more on a personal level, but some of it may very well be, a lot of it's going to go forward.
Very good. I'm going to ask one quick question to Randy, and then I'm going to let everyone get going. Randy, as a consultant, you get lots of different organizations coming to you for health. As people are going down the value-based road, any thoughts on sort of some common pain points you're seeing out there as people try and go down this road?
I think the one thing is that the IT enablement, population health analytics, care management kinds of capabilities, folks tend to segregate those and silo those, and really they're continuations of your overall IT and analytics strategy. So I think to think holistically about it's not a IT enablement of population health isn't a separate thing. It's just the ongoing evolution of the strategy for the organization from an IT perspective.
Very good. Well, here are my final thoughts, and these echo, I hope and I think what I've heard today. You have to build the technology first. If you're going down this road, you have to put the technology in place, then maybe get into some small contracts, and down the street there, down the road a ways is going to be getting involved in an ACO. This is serious business, and you don't want to get involved if you're not ready, because you won't be successful. And I think, as everyone said, especially I think as Liz said, it's ACOs may not be the end-all, be-all, but at-risk and value-based is, and it's not going away. And the tools are the same. If ACOs change to some other format, it's still going to be at-risk, managing populations, promoting wellness, and getting people to do healthy things, and knowing what they're doing as far as their health care goes, getting all that data reported to you, and then being able to spit it back in electronic quality measures, which is what Randy's presentation was about. So with that, I want to thank our panel, Chuck Christian, Liz Johnson, Rick Schooler. I want to thank our sponsor, Encore, represented by Randy Johnson today. Randy Thomas. And as I said, you'll receive an email when our archive has been posted to our YouTube channel. Attending our webinars gets your one-time CHCIO credit. Sponsorship opportunities, contact Nancy Wilcox. Questions, comments, in general, you can reach out to me, and you go to our website to see our upcoming schedule. So again, I want to thank everybody, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Great, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.